As usual, I find that this is so paradoxical that not just for me, but I see for many people, Corona has opened up a world of halacha. And when I say a world of halacha, I don't just mean the vast number of shilas that have come up, but I mean beyond that, people are learning halacha as almost a methodology. They're beginning to understand how to look up poskim. So what I want to cover today is another very good example of how these shilas really force us to go back to the sugyas, analyze them, and see how the poskim develop those sugyas. Today, I'd like to cover possibly four different shilas, but you know what? If I get through three of them, I'll be happy. One shaila, which you'll see here in the Big Day Chamudos on page 220, has to do with the Rofim and to what extent do we rely on Rofim to make critical decisions that have to do with safety, that have to do with social distancing, that have to do with overriding the Shabbats, perhaps. The second shaila we'll see is Simon Samach Beis, which you'll see on page 224. I hope you got the pages. And that has to do with a very fascinating issue about how far does one have to go in order to fulfill a mitzvah. Do I have to travel to the end of the world? Do I have to travel just for a meal in, one meal, this direction, that direction? How much of an effort do I have to put in order to fulfill a mitzvah? What are the requirements? What are the boundaries? The third shaila that I hope you have is about jumping the line, as we call it. Let's say, for example, you are scheduled to have the vaccine on a certain day. Are you allowed to jump the line? Under what conditions? And the fourth shaila, which I don't think we'll get to today necessarily, has to do with corona patients or recovered corona patients who cannot smell. They don't have a sense of smell. And can they participate in the bracha of Bore Mine V'Samim? We've touched on it in the past, but there's a lot more to talk about. So without further ado, let's begin on page 220, Nemanus Harofim. How much authority do we put in the Rofim? Does the halacha rely on the doctors? What I'm going to do in Mirz Hashem, that's my methodology, is to read very little of the text inside. I'm going to try to summarize the highlights of the text in a way that hopefully it'll flow from one logical argument to the other. The one who asks the question is some anonymous individual, so we don't know who he is. In other tshuvas, in the Big Day Chamudos, he mentions the name of the rabbi who asked him the child. But the way the shaila is formulated, I think, tells a lot. He describes a situation in which there are so many different opinions amongst the medical people about corona. And it goes from one extreme to the other with perhaps a middle way of a compromise. One approach says we have to be very, very careful. This is a dangerous situation to gather together and daven b'tzibur inside a building, inside a shul. Even if we're careful about social distancing, even if we're careful about masks, there is a danger, and we have to avoid it at all costs. The other extreme says the danger is not so great. Someone even go as far as to say it's very similar to other diseases and viruses and so forth that we know of. And let's be careful, but it's not a dangerous situation. We could open up shuls, we could have schools. We could basically relate to this as we would to a choli ragil, a regular disease. And in the middle, he says you have those who say, yeah, we have to be careful, but it's not dangerous. It is dangerous. It's not dangerous. There's a big, what we call in Israel, balagan. Nobody knows exactly who's telling it as it is. And truth be told, as he points out in the second paragraph, the story changes from day to day. Every other day, they come up with a new theory, a new test, a new experiment, and it's very unclear. The tshuva actually begins on page 221 with the first main paragraph on that page, Dibra Maschel V'yesh. And in this paragraph, he quotes the main sugya about Rofim. Do we rely on physicians? And this is a sugya at the end of Masechta Yoma. The Gemara there is talking about a pregnant woman, and does she have to eat on Yom Kippur? She has a desire to eat, and so forth and so on. And the Gemara says that with regard to choli, with regard to diseases, then if the Rofim will tell you it's a sakana, it's a danger, we will rely on the Rofim. But what happens when you have Rofim lined up, one against the other? The Gemara speaks about a case where 100 Rofim, 100 physicians say that there's no danger. There's no reason to override Yom Kippur, to override the Shabbos. And 2 Rofim, only 2 physicians, claim that this is a life-threatening situation. The Gemara says that we will have to worry about the 2 Rofim, and it's considered a sakana, even though it's 2 against 100. And this really is the most important source that puts the entire question of COVID into a certain framework, because as much as you'll find those who are laid back about the disease, all we need is 2 Rofim, which I'm sure we have, many more than 2, who are saying we assess it and evaluate it as a sakana, as a danger. And this perhaps, as he says at the end of the paragraph, is the most important, weighty issue in this whole confusion. The Gemara tells us in the same sugya at the end of Yoma that there's a halacha called Bikiyim. Until now, we've spoken about Rofim, physicians. I guess in a contemporary context, we'd call them medical doctors who have passed their exams and they are recognized and they have a medical degree. But now we're going to another level, and that's called Bikiyim. And the Gemara says that when we feed a chole on Yom Kippur, it's al-pi Bikiyim. It doesn't say al-pi Rofim. We're going to rely on Bikiyim. The question is, what is Bikiyim? Bikiyim literally translates as the experts. The experts will tell us whether or not we should violate Yom Kippur. And the Gemara goes on to say something else, that if we don't have Bikiyim, then we rely on the person himself. He or she will tell us whether he has to eat. The Gemara completely skips that middle category, which is called Rofim. It's almost as if the sugya presents 2 alternative methods by which we will override Yom Kippur. One method is called Bikiyim, and the other is called Al Pi Atzma. The Gemara quotes Rav Yanai, and Rav Yanai says that if the chola says, I don't need to eat, but there are 2 others who say that he does have to eat, so the chola omer eino tzarech, this you'll see in the main paragraph on the bottom right, on page 221. Utrei amri tzarech, and 2 say that he has to eat. Kaimalon, the final conclusion of the sugya, afal gav davi trei bahari tlas, even if you would have 2 Rofim that would tell us he doesn't have to eat, but there are, even if there are 3 Rofim, the majority, who say he doesn't have to eat, but there are 2 who says he have to eat, machilin osal pian. Now, why is this a radical departure from everything that we're familiar with in halacha? We have a principle in halacha called azlinan basar deos. That means that if we don't have testimony, and testimony requires two witnesses who are investigated, interrogated by Bezdin, Ksherim, but in the absence of witnesses, and we have to determine based on the evidence that we have what exactly took place, what is the reality, we go basar rov deos. Deos means as opposed to Aden. In Aden, there's no such thing as rov. It's either two, and it's 2 against 1,000, makes no difference. That's called trade. It doesn't matter how many Aden there are, as long as you have a cat of 2. But where does majority play the role? That's called deos. When we drop down a level, of course, we don't have Aden. But here, we have a principle called ein holchim bevikuach nefesh achar rov, which means that we undermine and we leave out the principle of rov in terms of deos. You've got 3 who claim he doesn't have to eat on Yom Kippur, 2 who say that he has to eat on Yom Kippur, he will eat on Yom Kippur. The Gemara then quotes Mabar Avashi, and he says that as far as the Chola himself is concerned, he has the supreme ability to say, I have to eat, even if 100 Rofim will say he doesn't have to eat. It's him against 100. Now, once we've seen the sugya, we go to the Rishonim. But when it comes to the Rishonim, with regard to issues of Pikuach Nefesh, there's really one kingpin, and that's the Ramban. The Ramban wrote an entire treatise on the laws of danger, medicine, and what we call today biomedical ethics in Jewish law. It's called Shar HaSakana, and if you ever want to get a hold of it, you'll find it in Piskei Ramban, which is published by Moser Rav Kook. Says the Ramban, Masnisen de Kabar Cholem Achilin Osal Pibikim. When does the Mishnah say that we will feed the Chol on Yom Kippur based on the evaluation of Bikiyim? That's B'chola over Einot Tzarech. The Chol himself says, I don't have to eat, I will survive this fast, and he has support from another Rofeh. But nevertheless, Machilin Osal Pi Bikiyim. How many Bikiyim do we need? Says Ramban, we need 2. And once we have 2 Bikiyim, we will feed him, we will override Yom Kippur, and there's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. Forget about what he says, the Chola, forget about what support he has. All we need is this bare minimum of Bikiyim, 2 Bikiyim. And that's enough. Now, what you need to do to really plow through this tshuva is to fast forward to page 222. On the left column, paragraph Omna. And here we take a look at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is in Hilchas Shabbos, Orach Chaim Simon Shin Chav Ches. Yesh Misha Omer, Dilagabi Sofik Nefashos Ein Tzarch Mumche. We don't need Mumchim. V'chol Bnei Adam Chashuvim Mumchim. Now, again, the Shulchan Aruch is saying something that's totally different than the impression you get from the Gemara. The Gemara is telling us that there's a special status and reliability to Mumchin. You need 2 Mumchin, and that's how the Ramban seems to codify it in Shara Sakana. And yet the Shulchan Aruch is quoting a Yesh Misha Omer, Sofik Nefashos Lahakel. We don't need a Mumcha. Everybody's considered a Mumcha. Says the Magen Avraham, and this is really the breakthrough. Everything depends upon this Magen Avraham. The al kolponim tzarech sheyomar shu makir bi oso choli. You can't just take a man off the street and upgrade him to the status of a bucky. Don't misunderstand the Shulchan Aruch. What the Shulchan Aruch means is that this person, and we have every reason to believe him, we don't think he's lying to us, claims that he knows this choli. He knows it inside out. And therefore, says the Magen Avraham, that if somebody who is not able to convince you that who makir is also choli, then eino neman lahaktish mumcha. We have a status of a mumcha. In the absence of a mumcha, we can rely on someone who makes a claim that he evaluates it and it's a sakon, it's a danger. But if we have a mumcha, says the Magen Avraham, we rely on the mumcha, and someone who's not a mumcha, even if he claims, I understand this disease, we don't believe him against the mumcha. Even if the mumcha is saying we don't have to violate Yom Kippur, and this other fellow who claims that he's makir sacholi, he says, no, this is a life-threatening situation. We have to override Shabbos or override Yom Kippur. He's not believed against the mumcha. Why is this Magen Avraham, Rabbi, say so critical for Corona? And honestly, we've been studying Corona for a while here, every Wednesday morning or afternoon, whatever you want to call it. And I never came across this Magen Avraham. It changes our whole perspective on Corona, because what we want is a mumcha. And he writes that afilu gabi rofim holchim achar bekiyus, meaning the bekiyim are believed and not the rofim. When you have a division of opinion amongst the medical staff globally throughout the world, you have to go basam mumchim. So that in Corona, we have to figure out who are the mumchim. Again, I'm not saying I have the answer to that question, but at least I have an intelligent question to ask. And I realize how all of halacha now in this pandemic really hinges upon one question. At least I have the question to ask. I don't know if I have the answer yet. The mumchim. And that's the Magen Avraham. And shomim lebaki ulemumche afilu neged rofim harbe she'enam bekim. You've got one mumcha against many rofim. You believe the mumcha, not the rofim, even though there are more rofim against the mumcha. I mean, Rabbos, I don't know if you realize how excited I am about this. I mean, excited not in the sense that I want to dance in the streets, but I'm excited in the sense that I have, as I said, a methodological approach over here. The sugya mentions mumcha, but the Shulchan Aruch doesn't really give you that flavor. It's the Magen Avraham, who's a full century after the Shulchan Aruch, or almost a full century. He's the one who pushes mumcha. And again, he has many supporters. Not the least is the Vilna Gaon in Elio Rabbah. And he too paskins that we have to listen to the mumcha. And the dissenter, who's one of my favorites, but in this case, he's the odd man out, I hate to say it, is the Aruch HaShulchan. I always love the Aruch HaShulchan. Anyone who has half a brain knows why, because he's incredible. But he argues against the Magen Avraham. And he says, Hejot, a non-mumcha, she makir sachol. He says, I researched this disease. I know what it's all about. Nema. We trust him even though he's not a mumcha. V'tzorach lechalel, and we will be machalel the Shabbos. Afilu neged hamumcha she'omer ein tzorach lechalel. There's the ma'isa. What could be a more practical machlokas, halach l'maisa, than this machlokas between the Magen Avram with the Elio Rabbah of the Gaon on one side of the equation and the Aruch HaShulchan on the other. The Magen Avram, the Aruch HaShulchan say, forget about this person who comes along and he says, I'm an expert. I did my research. We have a mumcha, and we don't believe anyone but a mumcha. And the Aruch HaShulchan says, no, we will believe a person who's makir and claims, I know this choli, against the mumcha, even if it means to be Mechal Shabbos. Now, give me just 5 more minutes. Why? Because I want to show you, Rabbosai, how this reverberates or the repercussions of this machlokas in terms of COVID.
Just explain difference between the mumcha and the baki, please.
We're getting there. Just hang in there 5 more minutes. Because as we apply it to COVID, you'll see what this is all about. What's a mumcha and what's a person who says, I know the choli. We're now on page 223. Because in an Ashkenazic world today of Psak, you always have to know where does the Mishnah Berurah fit in. So the Mishnah Berurah writes, and he quotes the Chai Adam, which is rare, but it's not, I shouldn't say it's rare. And he says that even Shar Achronim, which he doesn't name, very often you'll say Shin Aleph in the Mishnah Berurah, or in the Bir Aloch the Shar Tziyun, Shar Achronim, Shin Aleph. Pasku K'Magen Avram. Are you listening, Rabbosai? Do you hear what I'm saying? The Mishnah Berurah goes out of his way to say that in this argument, we paskin like the Magen Avram. And I'm not the only one, says the Mishnah Berurah. It's the Chai Adam, who's a big gun, and Shar Achron. The Hejot HaMakir Sachola. Hejot means he's a non-mumcha, but he knows this disease. Eino Neman Lahakrish HaMumcha. He's not believed to contradict the mumcha. Afilu Lahakem. Even if he's coming to say, let's consider this a sakonis nefashos and violate the Shabbos, violate Yom Kippur. Not believed. Because his words against the mumcha are worthless because there's something called a mumcha. Ulahakrish is a mumcha, eno nemon, afilu lahakel. He's a hejot and he's not a mumcha. How does this impact on COVID? Omar Mori Varabi, we're on page 223. If you want to find something to underline, this is what you should underline. 223, first paragraph, halfway down. Hagon Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky Shlita. Dahachi Kaimalan Ladina. We will paskin Ladina that the words of a hejot, who's not a mumcha, even if he claims he knows this disease, are worthless if he contradicts a mumcha. And he says that there are all sorts of non-mumchim. He gives a few examples. He speaks about interns. He speaks about PA, what's that called? Physician assistants. And he says they're for sure considered at yotos. V'daitom b'tela. And we will not consider their das, their opinion. But that's only half of the story. The other half of the story, and the more important half perhaps, is on page 224. Ume'ata. And again, Rabbos, I'm hoping you follow me inside because I'm just pointing out the highlights. Navo Lodun B'choli Corona. How does this impact on our situation today? You want to know why do we have so many extreme opinions about Corona? I'll tell you why. Because Choli Zeh Choli Chadash. It's a new disease. You know, I'm reminded of Chazal who say, B'chol yom yu beinecha kechadashim. And that's what Corona is. Halavai, we should treat the Torah the way we treat Corona. Every day is a new story. Okay, then? My granddaughter just came down with Corona. She's 14 years old. It's a brand new ball game. England are here, and mutations are in, and South Africa, and you don't know what is going on over here. In the first wave, I remember when somebody was in their 30s and came down with Corona, the whole world here was up in arms. Does anybody remember that? It's a whole new ballgame. And he goes on to say, Harofim lo makirim. The Rofim don't know what they're talking about. Again, it's a very harsh and almost facetious statement. V'lo yedu heitin, v'nischabtu, v'nelu, lahavin. They're trying to figure out the mahalach of this disease. The ofen dibuko, utchunosov, what's its nature? How do you get infected? That's also a whole to do. I know a person who's been exposed to Corona dozens of times, and he's never come down with Corona. And I know another person who came within, I don't know what, and he came down. Nobody can figure out how this works. Lemeshach kama chadoshim yotzu mechkorim chadoshim kimat v'chol yom bi'atrei chadashot al pi ha'meida mugval shoyamotzi oz. He says months and months have gone by, and every day there's a new research project. And on the social media and other places that chadashot, newscasts that say they keep telling you something else, a different story. V'harbe pa'amim, he says it's not rare. Shamechkorim sosrim zeh zeh. The conclusion of one study contradicts that of another study. The Elushes Hiru Bechol Davar. There are people who followed these studies and these directives, and they were very, very careful. V'yesh sakana, and at the end they were in danger. And there are others who weren't so careful about the precautions, and nothing happened to them. V'lo amru bar lehem kain. He says that those who are honest amongst the scientists will tell you, lo bar. My son is a doctor. He told me that if I get the vaccines, I'll be 95% protected. Then he added another few percentages because I already had the disease. I asked him the other day, different story. He doesn't know anymore. He can't tell me. And he says many of these scientific studies says we always have to be careful because there's a danger involved, and therefore we're going to present a picture that is very, very dangerous. Even this kind of expression or transmission about the danger of it, it wasn't from a deep, real understanding of the disease. I mean, initially they thought it was a disease that affects the lungs and the breathing system. Now they say it's a blood disease. I mean, I don't know what they're going to say tomorrow. Amar Mori Varabi, again, this is the punchline of the entire Chuvas. Hagon Rav Shmuel Kabinetsky. Diyesh lidrosh eitzel harofim. Heicha dief shel levar eitzel mumchim. If all you have out there on rofim, I'm not talking about hedyotos, like a PA or an intern. You have rofim, and you have no mumchim. So you'll have to follow the rofim. But ikar akvius, that's not the ideal way that you determine halacha. Toli b'mumchim. Okay, now Joe's asking me, so who are these mumchim? Who are they? Well, what makes you a mumchim? I mean, nobody knows what's going on with this disease. So who are the mumchim? So Rav Shmuel came up with the following formulation. Ha-mumchim heim elu shemisrad habriyut mitam hashiltonot shehem mizuman lehem kol meida shekayam ba'olam al choli zeh. Wow. You know who a mumcha is? A mumcha is someone who has access to all the world, to the entire globe, all the information, all the research, all the scientific studies. And again, you have to underline this sentence here. It's on the left column, at the end of the tshuva, on top. Second line. Shemizuman lehem kol hameda shekayam ba'olam al choli zeh. Not everyone is a mumcha. You've got to have access. You have to have at your fingertips all the knowledge, all the research at that moment in time. Gam harbe meida shelo hayu matzui etzel arofim acherim. These bodies that are recognized by the government have access to information that rofim don't have access to. The ikar kvius toli bahem. They are authorized as the mumchim legabi zeh machla with regard to this disease. V'shar harofim einam nechshavim legabi didhu. Why? Because they are not makir this disease. They may tell you that they know the disease, but says Reb Shmuel, they don't know the disease, and I'll prove it to you. Because tomorrow, just wait a few hours or a few days, you'll see that they'll come out and contradict what they said 2 days ago. Umashim ashirim, and when they warn us, eino mishum shebar lehem sheyesh sakana. They don't know for sure that there's a danger. Elisovrim, really what they're motivated by psychologically is shemi safek leish lachush lesakana. Bidami l'divrei Magen Avram Elio Rabba and Mishnah Brura. Right, we start with the Magen Avram. The Svirle, the Hejot, Eino Neman Lahachrich Mumcha. The Afsha Omer Sheyesh Ben Sakana. He claims that it's a danger, life-threatening, and he knows the disease. He's not a Mumcha. And therefore, Benidon Dinan, Coach Kecheno Makirimbo, no matter how many times he'll tell you over and over again, I know this disease, he doesn't know this disease. V'noag Mori v'Rabbi Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, B'chol inyoni chol hazeh, shekava hora'osov, he would only give a psak in halacha, al pi horas, hamumchim shenisparsamu, that were identified by the Misrad HaBriyut, v'lo itchashev bi'elu she'omru she'tzorech lahachmir tfei mehoras Misrad HaBriyut. Imagine, we have that polar extreme that we spoke about at the outset. They're saying, no, it's not enough, it's this, that, all the precautions. The only thing that you could work for is kanes raklecha that we spoke about last week. Quarantine yourself. That's it. Nothing else has even a havamin of success. So they want to go beyond the requirements of Misrad HaBriyut. And you've heard it. I mean, I hear it every day here. People who say that, we're about to end the lockdown. I can't, nobody knows what's going to happen there either. But officially, this Friday, we're ending the lockdown. And Sunday, Ben Gurion Airport is opening, or either Sunday or Monday anyway. My wife is supposed to be on a plane. She was stuck for a week now. I feel like I'm in, but when I was in Canada, it was the other way around. I was in Chutz La'aretz and she was in Eretz. Now it's the other way around. And she's supposed to be getting on a plane Sunday night. I said to Charney, daven really well that the plane will take off, because who knows what's going to be. And then I asked my colleagues, are we opening up the Amic Learning Center as of either Friday or maybe Sunday, depending upon public areas? There are nuances of differences here. No, we're not opening up. We're going to be more careful and more machmir than the Misrad HaBriyut. And I can just tell you, for one thing, the Big Day Chavudos doesn't agree, because his Rebbe, Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky, says that we don't have to go beyond the guidelines of those who are considered mumchim, who are advising the government in the highest echelons as to what are the hanchayot, what are the guidelines for us.
Last question.
Yeah. Well, you know what, David, if you don't mind, Joe was very kind and he was.
Okay.
No, let David go. Go.
Okay, David, you got it.
Okay, so I don't want to sound too skeptical, but I'll ask this anyway.
Yeah.
Well, let's assume we're dealing with Canada here rather than the U.S. or Israel. We've got the public health PHAC, I forget what it stands for, Public Health of Canada, something like that. And there's reason to believe that the woman in charge is politically motivated for certain of her pronouncements.
Lashon hara, I don't want to hear it.
She's not Jewish. She's not Jewish.
I didn't mean that, David. You took me a little bit too seriously. I was
Okay, well, it's
trying to be dramatic about it. You know,
it's Latayalis, okay? So my question is, if you think, based upon news reports or whatever, that part of what they're saying is politically motivated rather than strictly science, how does that change halacha according to Shmuel?
yeah. Again, I wouldn't make that call on my own. You know, you'd have to confer with some very important rabbanim in your neck of the woods. But yeah, I mean, Rav Shmuel is working with the assumption that we have something called a mumcha, and you're saying no, we don't have a mumcha over here. And probably Canada is not the worst case on the globe. There are probably a lot worse countries than what you're describing about political this. But there is a concept here called mumcha.
Well, let me ask you one more question.
And to me, again, I can't overemphasize this point. It's a mind-boggling thing, this tshuva, because I was always under the impression, ein holchem b'vikuach nefesh harov. Give me some intelligent person who sounds intelligent, and he went to medical school. He may even have, a fancy, medal or something. He got honors and he graduated class. He was tops in his class, and he tells me there's a danger here. Oh no. That changes here. If you have the Magen Avraham, if you have the Gaon, the Vilna Gaon, you have the Mishnah Brura. I'm not saying it's universally, unanimously accepted, but that's the mahalach that we're going with, is da zazach a mumcha. Now you go ahead and rack your brains and figure out who a mumcha is. In this tshuva, he's claiming that the Misrad HaBriyut, I guess he means in the United States because he's in Flatbush in Brooklyn, and probably the same thing will be true in Lakewood in New Jersey, that the Misrad HaBriyut is holy of holies, and they are accessing all the information, all the mechkarim, and they are giving you their guidelines as mumcha.
Let me ask one more question very quickly. Again, I hate to sound skeptical, but if that's the case, and Shmuel holds this halacha, then why doesn't he come out against anti-vaxxers?
I'm sorry, David, the last part of your sentence I didn't hear.
All right, what I'm saying is that if Shmuel holds this halacha,
yeah, that I got.
That the CDC in Atlanta is the Misrad HaBriyut, basically, or PHC in Canada, whatever, same thing. So if he holds that halacha, then why doesn't he come out halacha against the anti-vaxxers and say halacha says they know better than you, and with all your research and all your whatever, they're telling you vaccines work. They don't kill people with make them sick.
Well, I tell you the truth, I don't have access to the information that you're asking for, because again, all I have is the Big Day Chamudos, which was published, 6 months ago? I don't know. You'll take a look. You have to say if I don't. I just have the printouts,
Yep.
And I could just tell you this, that here in Israel, one after the other, the poskim were waiting online to take the vaccine. Waiting online. Now, could you jump the line? That's another tshuva that we have to go through. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know about jumping the line, but I mean, Rav Weiss, some of the Rabbanim here had themselves videotaped.
Yeah, I know that.
Some wanted even Ben Shechianu. Right. But honestly, that whole, like everything in Corona, the excitement of the moment just dies down. Now they're running around with microphones telling people that there are extra vaccines, they're a surplus and they can only hold on to it for a day, I think. Come and take it. You're not officially invited, you're invited. Where is all the excitement? I got to tell you, a month ago, not longer than a month ago, people were like dying to take the vaccine. I shouldn't use that term because it doesn't sound right. But today, at least in this part of the world, I don't know, where's the excitement? And you meet people on the street and it's not just, like you say, these anti-vaccine people. You have the average person on the street who's wondering and declaring whether he should take the vaccine for two reasons. Either because he heard a bad story. The guy who died probably had corona before he took the vaccine, or maybe the vaccine gives you 1% and that was enough to kill him because he had other conditions. I'll give you 15 million different answers to why so-and-so died. But 2 weeks ago, I went to a base Avel. The fellow that had died, who's a physician himself, had taken the vaccine a day before he died. Again, I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other, but the real issue is these so-called mutations, variations, and nobody knows, and nobody's willing to say. Of course, Pfizer will tell you what they'll tell you. You're protected from every type of corona disease that'll ever come to the face of the earth. Others will say, well, you have to get revaccinated every 6 months. And it goes on and on and on. I'm afraid to open up the news because who knows what they're going to tell me today? And everyone, you read an article, so everyone sends it to you. Your whole, I have this phone. Where's my phone? I don't know where it is. Anyway, it's flooded with, contradictory opinions from intelligent people about everything, including the vaccine. Now, I'm not going to tell you shouldn't take the vaccine. I think 100% you should take the vaccine. No question about it in my mind. And again, what would Rav Shmuel say today? I don't know because I don't have access to that information. It's not a long distance call for you. You could call Philadelphia, and find out.
Okay.
For me, it's a long distance call. Yeah, Joe.
So maybe part of the problem is Rav's talking about relying on the Ministry of Health, whatever, that they're the mumchas. And the problem is that they're swinging back and forth like they're on like crazy. So there's nothing, the whole concept really isn't working here. Masks, 2 masks, no masks, everything is back and forth. They just aren't giving there's no clear answer going through. So the whole halachic basis is in shambles with regards to this thing. There's nothing to.
I have to tell you, this is a reflection of what we're going through. I didn't write Corona. I didn't create Corona, and this is what we're facing. It's you want to say. I'm going to reformulate your words, and I hope I'm reflecting your sentiment in an accurate way. There is no mumcha today. We don't have a mumcha.
Right.
What can I tell you?
So, but
I'd rather go. Joe, if I had a choice between saying I don't have a mumcha today and being in total darkness, I would rather say we have a mumcha. Even though I know I'm fooling myself. I know that I'm fudging it here. What do you mean we have a mumcha? Why does the so-called mumcha change his mind every other minute, every other day? But that's what we have. Now, again, in any country and in any system, is it a mumcha? Is it not a mumcha? I don't know. But at least, as I said at the outset, and I've said this to you 1,000,001 times, when we get together once a week, and I call it Piskei Corona, and again, I hope this doesn't rub you the wrong way, but I'm less interested in halacha l'maisa than I am in the structure of it. At least I have a structure. I have a framework. I have a Magen Avram, and I have a Vilna Gaon, and I have a Mishnah Brura, and I have a concept called a Mumcha. And now I have to rack my brains and figure out who is the Mumcha, and do we have a Mumcha? At least I know where I'm going.
Right.
That's what excites me. What I'd like to do, Rabbosa, because again, time is always working against us, is to move on to the next tshuva, which again, methodologically, in terms of understanding halacha, is so fundamental. How far do I have to go in order to fulfill a mitzvah? And the issue at stake was Tvilas Kalim. Next week, in Mitzvah Hashem, I'm hoping we'll get to Tvilas Nida, going out to the ocean in order to be Toveles if she can't get access to a mikveh. But here we're talking about a less dramatic shaila, and that is Tvilas Kalim. Now, first, just to set the framework here, Tvilas Kalim, is it a mitzvah d'oraisa? Is it an iser that the Torah says you can't use the keli unless you put it to the mikveh because it was manufactured by a guy, blah, blah, blah? Or is the entire entity a derabban? So he begins this tshuva with a Gemara at the end of Avodah Zarah, and it's crystal clear from the Gemara that Tvilas Kalim is a mitzvah d'oraisa, and we derive it from the parsha of Klei Midrash. It's there. He doesn't rely on the sugya because maybe he says, take a look in the Trumas Hadeshen, take a look in the Shulchan Aruch and Yoredeya, and you will see clearly that we're dealing with a mitzvah saseh d'orais. And he says you'll find in the Gaon of Vilna, and then we get to the main issue here, the suffix of the Chai Adam. So this you'll find on page 225. And Chai Adam vacillates on the following issue. Supposing I would have to go from my city to another city in order to mekayv the mitzvah, am I obligated to do so? Now, the impression you get when you read the Chai Adam is that he's talking about a mitzvah d'oraisa. He doesn't mention that it's a mitzvah d'rabbanan. And the only place in Shas where the Gemara actually addresses this question head on is a sugya which appears in a few places regarding Netilas Yadayim and Tefillah B'tzibur. So I live in a city, and in order to get to synagogue, I have to go to another city to daven B'tzibur. Or in the case of Netilas Yadayim, I want to sit down and eat a meal, or I want to wash my hands for davening. I have no access to water. How far do I have to go for water? So again, keep in the back of your mind, which we're not up to yet, that the one sugya that addresses this question is dealing with a mitzvah d'rabbanan. Netilas Yadayim, no way, no how is d'oraisa. And even Tefillah B'tzibur is not d'oraisa because I can fulfill my chiyuv Tefillah b'yechidus. Okay. Now, the Chai Adam thinks that he has a proof from a psak of the Shulchan Aruch with regard to shofar. The case is that there are two cities. One does not have a shofar, but they will recite the Seder HaBrachos, Malchi Zichronos shofars. The other city has a shofar, but they're not capable of reciting the brachos. You know that shofar is al Seder HaBrachos. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins, Yelech le'ir shetokim. He should prefer to go to the city where they blow the shofar. Says the Chai Adam, Nire, just 1 second. Oh, Isal kedai tzorch lakor b'mkomo. He says the following: if the halacha is that we're required to go from one city to another in order to fulfill a mitzvah, how is it that there's a city that is only reciting the brachos? They have to pack their bags, and go to another city where they're blowing the shofar. The answer is you don't have to go from one city to the other. If you are at the crossroads of two cities, Shulchan Aruch tells you which way to turn. Go towards the city where they have a shofar to blow. But the Shulchan Aruch doesn't criticize, doesn't question the Metzias, the reality here that there are these two cities, and here they're doing the brachas, here they're doing the tkiyas. Go to where they're doing the tkiyas. But why didn't the city that doesn't have access to a shofar, why didn't they all pack their bags and spend Rosh Hashanah in Ummah? No, I'm sorry, not in Ummah. In the other city where they're blowing a shofar. Ela al karchach, says the Chayyim, Eino tzorch lakar mi'ir li'ir. You don't have to get up from one city and go to the next city. Miu, he says that he believes that if the journey to and from to get to the other city and back can be achieved within a day, on the same day. Again, he's not traveling on Rosh Hashanah, you understand, but the amount of time that it would take him to go to that city where they're blowing shofar and get back home is within a day. He says, Nira li shechai. Then he's chayiv to go to the next city. But assuming it's going to take him more than a day, meaning more than a half a day to get there, more than a half a day to get back, he's not chayiv to go to the other city. And all the poskim deal with this raya of the Chayyim, and they try to push it off. For example, in the second paragraph here on page 225, he quotes the Dvar Yoshua, who says that, you know what, it could be that other city that doesn't have a shofar is in a state of ones. Maybe the people there in that community are very old, they're weak, they're cholim, and they can't get themselves from one city to the other. It doesn't mean that we have to decide on this basis that you don't have to go to another city in order to do a kind of mitzvah. Or, for example, maybe there's Shas Zera, and they can't go to the other city to hear the shofar because of the anti-Semitism at that time. Then the same author, the Chai Adam, in another work of his called the Nishmas Adam, he brings a raya from a Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara in Sukkah says that on Yontif we have a chiyuv to Kabbalas Pnei Rabo B'Regel. If he can get to the other city where his Rebbe is and come back on the same day, he's chayav. And therefore, the Chayyim believes he has clear-cut proof from two different sugyas, one in Shofar and the other in Kabbalas Pnei Rabo B'Regel, that within the day's journey back and forth, you're obligated to pick yourself up and go to another city. And again, the opponents shoot him down. Minchas Yitzchak, Hasam Shiny, Dekach Nitkna Mitchil Demotzui, Sherabo Eno Adam, Shedar Yachadi Tobeir. That's the way they were masakin the mitzvah of Kabbalas Pnei Rabo, to go from one city to the other. That's the nature of the mitzvah. Because it's very rare that your Rebbe will actually live in the same city as you. I mean, we're talking about more mature people, so forth and so on. Now, on the left column, for those who are following the text, he quotes a Yerushalmi. The case is Ein Mayim Mitzuyim Lefanav. He doesn't have access to water for the Tilas Yadayim. Berichuk Yoser Midalid Minim. He says that he'll have to walk more than Dalid Minim, which is approximately 72 minutes. Or Liachorov, if he has to retrace his steps, and as he's traveling in this direction, so he goes forward for 4 milim to get access to the water. If it's behind him and he has to go in the opposite direction, surrendering his movement forward, then 1 mil, which is probably about 18 minutes worth. But now, either way, it's beyond that merchak. He says he should wrap up his hands in a mappa. He should eat his bread without washing his hands. Says the Magen Avram, Shomrei ginos upardesim kilachorav dam. In the case of those who are out there in the fields, then no matter where the water is, it's always considered liachorav, as if he has to hassle himself to go backwards, and it all depends on 1 meal. So the Mefarshim, again, it's so interesting how the 2 tshuvas are all contingent on how to understand the Magen Avram. They say that it seems from the Magen Avram, who quotes this Yerushalmi about Shomrei Ginos, that Adam HaYoshev B'Beiso, if a person is at home, he's not a Yoshev B'Pardesim, he's not a Shomer Ginos, Tzarech Lelech Daled Minim. He's Daled Milim. He has to go wherever it is within a radius of Daled Minim to get access to the water so that he can eat his pas. That's the way the Magen Avram is understood, I should say, by the Chayot. The Prima Gadu, also more or less a contemporary of the Chayot, he writes that we have to learn another Simon in Shulchan Aruch, Simon Tzadi Beis, and there we're talking about Holech B'derech Chayav Lelech Daled Milim. He's got to go forward Daled Milim. Tzarich Lirchotz Yodav V'Raglav V'im Yeshlo Im Ein Lo Tzarich Lachzor Achorvad Parsa Hani Mili Kishu Holech B'derech V'Amayim Nimtzoim Lefana Aval Im Tzarich Lachzor Liachorov L'Mokom Mayim Ad Mil Choz. Fine. So everything is about a traveler. He's got to go 4 miles in the direction that he's traveling and 1 mile going back. Yosef Mibil in a Chozeh. Now, the Shulchan Aruch is talking about a Holich B'derech. So what is it? Is it a special kula? Are we being makil on behalf of a Holich Derech? Holich Derech is a status in halacha, and we don't want to be matriach him. Going forward, Daled Milim, no more. Backwards, 1 meal, no more. Says the Chayodam, Hayoshev B'Beiso, he doesn't have the status of a Holich B'derech. He says, Eino Mechuyev L'troach Achar Mayim, El B'Pachos Mimil. Just the exact opposite of what we thought. We thought there was a special kula and a leniency on behalf of the Holich Regel. And he's saying now on the opposite. For the person who is Holich Regel, they were machmir, that you have to go as far as Daled Minim. But if you're Yoshev B'Beiso, you don't even have to go a meal. And Lazek Kaimelan Yushalmi, the Kevon shall oskim b'malach acheres lo trichu Yosef mimil, avali olam hayoshev b'beiso, eino chayav litroach. He doesn't even have to go a meal, but certainly not more than a meal. That is the shita of the Chayot. So the Chayot is very makil with regard to a Yoshev b'beiso. And he thinks that all these requirements of having to go for 4 milin, that's only for a Holech B'derech, because he's anyway on the way. And the opposite approach, which you'll see here if you have page 226, is taken by the Shulchan Aruch HaRab on the bottom right of your page. And he says that on the contrary, the real shear is always going to be at least Daled Milim. And we were makil for the whole Echad. But if you're Yoshev Beso, you don't have that leniency, you don't have that kula. And he says, Kishu B'tov Beso, in Be'iro, Mechuyev Lelech, Mi Beso, he says, Dalid Am, Dalid Mil. Okay, now all this is based on the Tilas Yadayim, which is only the Rabban. Lo nisbarli, im din mil v'dalid milim, is on the bottom left, shaycha gam mitzvah doraisa. Now we're talking about Tfilas Kalim. And we've already established, we've seen in the Trumas Hadeshin and others, that Tfilas Kalim is doraisa. That's the Pashtus of the Sukkah at the end of Avodah Zarah. Are we going to let you get away with these shiurim and these kulos of a holech l'derech, or according to the Chayodam, Yoshev Bebeso? And he quotes the Das Kedoshim. I don't know, I'm not familiar, but on page 227, Tzarech li'iyun odos inu yaderech b'chtei lavo l'makom sheyuchal l'kayim mitzvahs tefillin gabi mayim l'tefila nosnu chazal l'fonov dalad miyam li'acharav miyam. But ulai l'gabi mitzvahs esei doraisa like tefillin shebechol yom l'kayim mitzvahs esei mechuyev l'mirhat. Mirhat means he has to do a tircha, put in an extra effort. Kama parsi mil, for many parsos. And if you take a look at the Igros Moshe here on the bottom right, he says that the shear of mil is only with regard to tefillah b'tzibur. Shegam b'liat tzibur osa mitzvah. It's tefillah even without a tzibur. Al Kain, Heikelu, they would make him since he has a mitzvah, even if he doesn't go to shul, and he davens b'yechidus lefocho mitzvah zu with one meal or daled mealin. And Rav Moshe says, Lo dami l'shar mitzvah few midrabbanan. Even other mitzvahs that are drabanan, how much more so doraisa, is yesh lahachmir. We cannot consider him circumstances beyond his control. Ella, he says, with the exception of hotzas mamon b'sach gadol yosem michomish, to spend more than 20% of your income, that's an onus. But other than that, and this he's talking about a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. And tefillah b'tzibur is not a mitzvah d'Rabbanan because he has the mitzvah of tefillah without the tzibur. How much more so a mitzvah say doraisa? And comes along the Dvar Yoshua that we mentioned earlier, and he says that for a mitzvah doraisa, it depends if he can fulfill the mitzvah somewhere in the city. If it's within the city, then he's got to go from one end of the city to the other end of the city. Avolo itrichu me'ir le'ir l'kayim mitzvah afilu mitzvah say doraisa. So you're going to ask yourself, where is there a mikvah? Is there a mikvah within the city or in the next city over? I was wondering about, I have a friend who lives in Bergenfield, New Jersey, but half his house is in Teaneck. So I don't know what's considered going from one city to the other. Now, this is something all over Jersey. You know, I'm sure every state in the Union and Canada, you'll have the same thing. But it's very fascinating. You know, are you in Vaughan? What's it called? Vaughan over there, that north? I don't know, how do you pronounce it? Anyway. So
Vaughan is right.
How do you pronounce it?
Vaughan.
Vaughan. They put a GH in there, so it throws me for a loop. But anyway, so you can have 1 foot in Toronto, 1 foot in Vaughan. I don't know. Is that going from year to year? I don't know. It does basic. I had this Shiloh once in Yichud. They asked me the question. You know, Baila Be'ir is a matir of Yichud. What happens in a case of Bergenfield and Teaneck, you know? And then the Dvar Yoshua quotes what I call a punchline tshuva, and he says, how are we doing on the clock? Okay, we have to finish up soon. But he says that the real answer to our question about how far you have to go for a mitzvah is, of all places, at the very beginning of Har Chaim and Siman Yud Gimel in the laws of tzitzis. And the Shulchan Aruch writes that im nifsak echad min atzitzios b'Shabbos umisbayesh leishe below talis yochol lilbosh talis b'li tzitzis, meaning hifsaki, there's a rip in his tzitzis, ela below bracha, mishum kavod habrios. And he says, dafka b'Shabbos. Why? Because on Shabbos he can't fix his tzitzis. But bechol kahagavna asur. In other words, we don't override an isa doraisa for the sake of kavod habrios. But in the case of Shabbos, he's not obligated in tzitzis because he doesn't have a pair of tzitzis. But during the week, he can get access to tzitzis. Therefore, he's obligated in tzitzis, and he's enjoined from wearing a beged without tzitzis. That becomes an isa doraisa, and that we're not going to allow him to violate for the sake of kavod habrios, because kavod habrios can override an essay, but not a los essay, and not an isa. And all this is built on a careful reading of the Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Tzitzis, because the Shulchan Aruch is only willing to allow you, for the sake of kavod habrios, to wear a beged that has 4 corners without tzitzis, for the sake of kavod habrios, because it's Shabbos, and there's no Isur here on Shabbos because he cannot get access to tzitzis. But on a weekday, no way are we going to allow him, for the sake of kavod habrios, to override tzitzis and wear a beged without tzitzis, because he violates an Isur. Says the Bigdei Chamudos. This is Rav Daniel, our Meshiv. He says, herein lies the key to our question about Tfilas Kalim. He says that Tfilas Kalim is number 1, a mitzvah aseh Torah, like tzitzis, and number 2, an Isur, hishtavshus b'kli, without tefillah. You're not allowed to use the kli without tefillah. And therefore, he says that the parallel, the equation, the analogy between tzitzis and tefillas kalim is like 2 drops of water. And we will not override the isur of using a keli without mikvah, just like we will not override the isur of wearing a beged of daled kanfus without tzitzis. And he himself asks a kasha on himself from the Shulchan Aruch Tafresh Pei Hey, that if you hold Pashas Zohar is doraisa, which is one shita, then Bnei HaYishuv, those who live in the outlying areas, the villages, and they can't hear, maybe they don't have a Sefer Torah, they don't have anyone who could read a Sefer Torah to hear Pashas Zohar. Ein lahem, einem tzrichim lavo l'makom sheyesh kriya b'tzibur b'Shabbos halol, even though Zohar is doraisa. We just finished saying that there is no leniency for tircha and schlepping for the sake of a mitzvah doraisa. And now we're saying that even though kriya of Pasha Zohar is doraisa, you don't have to go from your yishuv over to the city. Harei de chayav on the top page 228, lavor me'ir li'ir k'dei l'kayim mitzvah say doraisa. How do we square with what we said before? When do we force him to pack his bags and go to hear the Parsha Zohar if it's doraisa according to that shita? That's when he's located very close to the city. Anyway, we're running out of time, so we're up to page 228, which is pretty much the end of the tshuva. And he says we have to find some sort of solution to this problem. How do we get the keli into the mikveh? And not only that, he quotes the Mishnah Berurah and Bir Halacha Siman Kuf Samach Gimel, that this whole distinction about schlepping here and schlepping a hin, and 1 meal this way and 4 meal in this way, that's not a shear in merchak, it's a shear in zman. How long will it take you to go those 4 meals? And the answer is get into your car, and within 72 minutes, you're up in the cottages. If you follow my point. So this whole business here of how far we have to be matriach you. Is it 1 meal? Is it 4 meal? And you're in the city, you're in a different city, you're in your house, you're not in your house, you're out in the pardes. All these distinctions have very little meaning in contemporary context because the Bir Halacha says it depends upon Zman. So he suggests on the bottom of page 228 that what he should do is he should be makna the keli, or at least partnership in the keli, to an Eina Yehudi. Actually, first on the bottom of page 228, he suggests that he gives it an outright gift to a guy, and he should request that the guy give him unlimited she'ela rights to borrow the kli, but it always remains the kli of the guy. And I would add a footnote here. I heard in the name of Reb Shlomo Zalman the same thing with a toaster and different electronic things that you'll ruin in the mikveh, that you should give it to a guy, and we've done that in our family many, many times. But he says the Taz doesn't like it, because the Taz says that who you fooling? This is not she'ela. She'ela means you borrow something for a certain period of time, but unlimited, open-ended she'ela is not she'ela. Not only that, the Taz goes ahead and says that we don't look for it's to duke, to find ways of circumventing a mitzvah. And at this point, he says that to avoid some of these issues, he says, you know what? Yakne chelik me'akli li'akum. And now he has a Shulchan Aruch that says that if you have a kli that's owned partnership between a Jew and a guy, it doesn't need tefillah. In other words, the ownership of the guy, even though it's a partnership, is enough to be mafkia the chiyuv of tefillah. And I thought that he's happy with this, but at the end he says, we don't want to find tatzduke to be patring ourselves. And not only that, the Gemara says that b'shas rischa means when the Malach HaMavis is out there, you certainly don't want to find ways of avoiding mitzvahs. And therefore, he says, Achshav hazman hu zman lizor biyoser, litfol kelim kedas ukalacha, v'lo lechapes eitzo lipotim in a mitzvah. He says, don't rely on my eitzah, that you give half of the kli ownership over to the guy, and now we have shutfis, and we're going to be medayik for the Shulchan Aruch that you potter, because that's a titztiki, that's a way of circumventing the mitzvah, and it's ace rischa, we cannot avoid a mitzvah. Honestly, I just want to make two comments, because we have to go. Comment number one is that, what do you mean they punish him for circumventing a mitzvah? It's Shabbos. It's Yontif. I have a kli. I need it for Simchas Yontif. I need it for Kvod Shabbos. And you're telling me that I'm going to be punished because I'm trying to avoid a mitzvah? On the contrary, I'm looking for a way of fulfilling a mitzvah. I don't know that I would be nervous about this. But secondly, what bothers me here is, I write a letter to the editor here. Why doesn't he mention the simple possibility of being mafkir your kli, declaring that it's hefker? Again, there are laws of hefker. You have to notify at least 3 people. No, call them up on the cell phone and tell 3 people you are now putting this kli outside your door. Kol dichvin, anyone who wants to take it, take it. That's hefker b'fnei shlosha. You wait a half hour, and then you could be zoch. I don't know why he omits it. Rabosai, next week, I'd like to cover with you this fascinating tshuva about cutting the line for the vaccine. I was amazed at this tshuva. And again, it's another example of how Corona in a very weird sort of way, has generated the minds of the poskim to come up with such original ideas. Okay, then? So again, I think Yudi wanted to ask me something, so now's a good time. And that's what we have.
I'd rather ask you privately.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Bobby. Oh, I thought you were going to ask something. Okay, then. So anyone who wants to go could go, and then I'll be alone, so to speak, with Yudi. Oh, Reuven, you wanted to say something? Wait a minute. You have to.
Not sure if
Now I can hear you.
no, I don't think so. I'll
All right.
hold up.
So
on that
let me
question.
wish you a
Thank
great week. It's always good to see you, Reuven. I remember the good old days we used to learn face to face.
Okay.
Okay, so
All right.
Rabosa, you have to
All right.
press. There's a little red button there that says leave.
Yep.
See?
Okay.
Shkoyach.
Good. Thank you so much.
So be in charge for another handouts next week.
What about next week?
Will be more handouts next week, or
Well, first we're going to start this cutting the line. I mean, that'll
Right.
occupy us for at least a half hour, next
good?
week.
You let me know. You let me know on
And then
Tuesday.
we have next Simon, right, about women going to the mikvah in the ocean.
Okay, good.
I forgot what number it is. Samach Gimel.
I'll look it up. Okay, Shkoyach. Have
All
a good
right,
week.
thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yuri, it's just us, the two of us.
Hey, sorry, it's about my parents are both in two situations. My mother's in Bakerest. She got corona, but she had the vaccine a week before she got corona. And Baruch Hashem, she's asymptomatic. She's just starting to eat. It's about 2 weeks and a bit since she got it. It's very unusual there because Baycrest is extremely diligent with their health procedures and so on. And I was just wondering, in terms of guidance from the Rav, what does the Rav say in terms of conveying information back and forth between two older parents, when they're very sensitive, and obviously they have their challenges with their health and mental states, and you don't want to scare one with information on the other. One is always asking about the other. One cannot see the other because of corona. We can't see her except for these weird devices that we're holding. So what does Rav generally say in terms of those guidelines?
I'm not sure if I'm going to answer your question, because but there's no need to say anything that would scare another person.
Right, but we have to actually lie.
I think it's not only a heter, it's a mitzvah. In such a case where there's sensitive health issues, the last thing you want to do. Now, again, if you can figure out a way, anochi esav b'chorecha, you know what I mean? And avoid sheker, that's great. But I don't think you should.
My
I don't think you
father,
should hesitate for a moment.
my father, Kanai Nahar, has been aware from the outset, from several years ago, has always watched like a hawk over my mother. And Baruch Hashem, he's well, but in a reaction to what was going on, he ended up in hospital 2 nights ago with bleeding, with internal bleeding, because he was obviously very nervous about it. And of course, we have been lying and saying, no, mommy's eating, everything's okay, she's asymptomatic, but he knows that the helper is not there. He knows that the helper who he was advising and being in touch with himself is not there until yesterday. And she herself got corona. She's a full-time help, an amazing person. And so he ended up in hospital, we know, because of being nervous about it, right? And so he's undergoing a major thing. And again, like every phone call, every communication, a person like that is asking, what do I do? What mitzvahs do I do? Like the Rav is saying, like what's doing with mommy? And you just have to kind of dismiss everything
Right.
to try and get
You
them
got to do the
through.
best you can. We're all humans. Try to do the best you can and see what you can do to calm him down, even if it means sometimes, fabricating a little bit the truth, because what's critical here is that your father be well.